more real, more permanent, indeed eternal, to be spent in everlasting beatitude with God or never-ending punishment. A tremendous force for the unity of Christendom and for the possibility of a shared biblical culture was the possession of a common sacred language, Latin, which the Church had inherited from Rome. This was a language used in all matters of religious culture, including secular diplomacy and politics. The word secular is put in quotation marks, as medieval people did not distinguish, as we do in modern Western societies, between the sacred and the secular. Western theological literature and art are saturated in imagery and idioms taken from the Latin Bible. The Christian liturgy was conducted in Latin, as were creeds, one of the major media for instruction in the rudiments of faith in all centuries of the Middle Ages, though only clerics would have known the Latin in some times and places, as most lay Christians were not Latinate. It was also the language in schools, and eventually in universities. In his path-breaking analysis of the making of Europe in the Central Middle Ages, historian Robert Bartlett has painstakingly charted the outward establishment of bishoprics, especially in the Baltic region, as Latin Europe expanded eastward and northward. He observes that in the process of expansion, new peripheries came to resemble the old center of Europe. It would not be going too far to say that something like a homogeneous culture emerged in the Central Middle Ages. This culture had many shared elements, including shared military technology, agricultural practices and instruments, and the configuration of villages and towns. Yet it was a culture that also shared a common religious view of the cosmos, widespread religious beliefs, and shared religious practices. These too were essential to establishing a common European culture. It is on the establishment and evolution of this religious culture from circa 500 to 1500 that I will focus in this book. Many existing textbooks have laid out this very general picture of the Middle Ages. As is the case with most medievalists, textbooks on medieval ecclesiastical history are causing my bookshelves to groan. I have learned a vast amount from these volumes. Indeed, I owe their authors a profound debt of gratitude. The best of these textbooks are not merely works of synthesis, though synthesizing the scholarship on a millennium of history is no contemptible feat, but are also scholarly works in themselves, books that made us see the medieval church in new ways. I think, for example, of R.W. Southern's 1970 volume, Western Society and the Church in the Middle Ages. Southern's textbook brilliantly analyzed central figures, movements, and individuals, as well as relations with the Eastern Church in the High and Late Middle Ages. So, why a new textbook? My hope in composing this volume was to synthesize the important new scholarly developments in the field of medieval Christianity in the 4 decades since the publication of Southern's book, and to integrate them with some traditional themes and topics in medieval Christianity. I have attempted to write a narrative account of the Middle Ages, without sacrificing analytical rigor or explanatory power, one that takes advantage of the many virtues of literature published in this field since the publication of Southern's textbook. For that reason, I have spent time in almost all chapters talking about the stories of real human beings and their lives, not merely because of the intrinsic interest of their stories, but also because of the illustrative power of their lives. Listeners will notice, for example, that I have written at length on women in virtually every chapter of the book. Insofar as is possible, I have written about them in relationship not just to other women, but also to men, who venerated, wrote about, sneered at, or corresponded with them. Such a book could not have been written 40 years ago. Now, a book that sidelines women to a single chapter or single section would, or in my view should, be unimaginable. All historians of medieval Christianity are deeply indebted to leading historians of women in the Middle Ages, above all to Caroline Walker Bynum, who has revolutionized our field of study. So too have scores of other scholars. This book depends heavily on their enormously stimulating contributions. Much ink has been spent since 1970 discussing popular religion and the problem of a two-tiered model of piety that attempts to explicate Christian practices in terms of the religion of the people and the religion of the prelates.